And we're live. Welcome, everybody, to Z.Dev. Okay, sorry. You can cut that part out, right?
Too late. So I'll start, I guess, with my questions. The biggest question I have is, as far as I understand, and you can explain if that understanding is wrong, the upcoming Z release is a big rewrite, right? You switch from GPIU 1 to GPIU 2. And the question I have is, why do the big rewrite? It sounds like it was a really big multi-month thing, and we've all heard one shouldn't ever do the big rewrite. So why did you do it?
Nathan?
I think you take that one. I mean, I was deliberately waiting to, give Max or Antonio a chance to respond, just because I feel like I was sort of the advocate for the rewrite. But I also think it's fine to retrospect a little bit on it. Like, did they still think it was a good idea? Do they regret it, etc.? It didn't, I would say, arguably did not fail. I mean, I don't know how you would have defined failure, but I agree. I've heard that, I know that, but I'm all very rewrite driven programmer, I guess. Like, it's a big part of my process, this ability to, because I kind of feel like when you've lived with a system long enough, like, it's very difficult to escape sort of the fundamental DNA that's baked into that system. Like, it's sort of like, I would fix A if not for B, and I would fix B if I'd already fixed A. Like, things become almost like deadlocked. Decisions become like deadlocked on other decisions. And so I think, I mean, first of all, like, the central lesson that I learned early in my career is that people often underestimate what they can achieve incrementally. I'll just say that. Like, so, the original sin of most developers is not realizing that you can increment your way there. And I've certainly have a tendency to still run afoul of that, to underestimate what can be achieved incrementally. But I also think there's a tremendous power when you've really learned a lot about a problem through building V1 to sort of set yourself free in a single, Gordian knot slicing chop of all of those sort of, constraints, encumbrances that are kind of deadlocked on each other, and say, sort of set everything free, liquefy the system, as it were, and then re-clarify the core ideas that are there, and get things super clean in a way that, so I think it's sort of, we took on a ton of risk, but for the place that GPUI got, ultimately, like, we may have gotten to sort of slightly better places in less time, but I don't think we could have gotten to as good a place as we've gotten in as short amount of time, incrementally. That we would have spent too much time sort of working around things that didn't even need to be in our way to begin with. And that, in my mind, is the virtue of a rewrite.
So you said you advocated for this rewrite. What made you start this? Like, what made you go, no, we have to rewrite this?
It dawned on me slowly. Like, it began as a very specific solution to a very specific problem, which was Derek, a contract designer that we brought on. He came in saying, I love to get my hands dirty. I love to build UI. He was working with the Tailwind CSS team. He's a really good hands-on carpenter of design. And he just couldn't get any traction in the old framework. And we'd had the same issues with Nate of, he felt like, okay, I can go do stuff in Figma and then try to get other engineers to do it. But I just think, like, it was really creating communication bottlenecks and just weird organizational dynamics. And, its heart, it dawned on me like this is a technical problem.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning of it. Is, again, it's another one of those. Oftentimes, I think a failure mode of engineers is they try to apply technical solutions to human problems. But in this case, I really do think it was a human problem that just didn't need to exist if a more effective technical solution were in place, where a designer who, designers have, like Nate has a different skill set than me. I couldn't whip out a, beautiful looking site or UI design as fast as he could. Although I think I can kind of get by. And it's sort of, I think, the opposite. He can kind of get by in code.
Yeah.
And he's learning more and more every day, but like we weren't making that easy for him.
And for other
or any of the
engineers
other
too,
engineers.
right?
Oh,
yeah.
go ahead, Antonio.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like, I think anytime, I mean, I remember over and over, like anytime any of us had to touch UI code, it was always like, oh my god, like, yeah, I hate this. Like, why is this so frustrating? Like, there was so much friction. So the whole team was feeling it, not just Nate.
What did that look
Yeah,
like?
we felt paralyzed, I think.
I've
a little bit.
only seen the newest version. What did the old, like, how did you do this before? Change the UI in code.
Their audio is all fucked up.
Sorry. Am I?
It's okay for me so far.
Oh, is it me?
Are you?
Okay. On my
Okay,
side,
that sounds
everything's
good.
fine.
For me, I just couldn't hear the question.
Okay.
Literally. Yeah.
But
so
can
say
you
it
hear me?
again.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, every time you like raise your voice or something, it like truncates. I don't quite understand why.
I have Torsten's audio okay.
Same.
All
Alright,
right,
then-
it must be me. I mean, okay, try asking it again.
All right, then Max, you can reply. My question was, GPUI 1, what did the API look like? Right now, what I've seen this week is this Flexbox-inspired DSL with diffs and childs, and reminds me of HTML and CSS. What did it look like before? What was so painful about it?
Well, it was inspired by something completely different from HTML before. It was based on the Flutter model of layout, where there's a little bit more restricted model of how elements lay out, where there's like a kind of a single layout pass, like up and down the tree, where parent nodes pass constraints to their children, and then children decide solely based on that what their concrete size is going to be. So it's like strictly less powerful than the like constraint solver based way that Flexbox works. But it what like Nathan came up with that adaptation of Flutter's model that we got by with for a while. But so one problem was you had to adopt that mental model of like constraints coming down, sizes coming up. But then the other thing was that our solution for trying to make the UI development workflow tractable with Rust compile times and that layout model was that we had this combination of Rust code for like defining the element tree, but we had these what we called themes at the time, which were not exactly themes. They were like giant JSON blobs that contained every single property of every element we would load at runtime, so that we could do this thing where there'd be a TypeScript file that we could write that would describe every property of every element basically, and we would use some amount of TypeScript abstractions at that layer to like reduce duplication in that and have some idea of common styles, but it was sort of all at the layer that was pre-compiling it to JSON that the app would load at runtime. And so, and we thought that would allow us to like tweak the UI at runtime and have elements resize. But what it ended up doing was just introducing so much indirection between, not indirection, but like this sort of split in the way the UI was expressed between the Rust code that set up the elements and then the TypeScript code that had to apply styles to every element, that it ended up kind of not working out as we had hoped in terms of being able to dynamically style things. It was too complicated. And so, yeah, I remember like my experience prior to Nathan starting on the like kind of development of the new UI framework was just that we needed, we kind of needed to start over with our assumption of how the workflow should be of building the UI in Rust. Like it wasn't going to work to say, we can have this super simple and fast layout system based on Flutter, and then everything else is like applied in JSON. It in theory, like I thought it sounded good. And what was cool, another thought behind the old system was we thought we could make it so you could have UI themes. Like some developer could come write a new JSON blob that would completely restyle every element in the app. And like you could do something like the material theme in Zed all in JSON, and it would totally, everything would be configured at runtime. But it ended up just being, I don't know, like in practice bad. And like everyone on the team, it didn't, the like loading things at runtime didn't make us faster at developing. It made us slower because every time we wanted to.
So does that mean who proposed it? When somebody proposed, let's do a rewrite, everybody went, let's go, this sounds good? Or was there skepticism? Yeah, you're smiling. So
yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, I heard Nathan, like, I think multiple like people, like, I think we're at a certain point in the development of the app when we sort of like developed the system and then did a lot of work for a while that didn't involve lots of buttons and forms and UI and stuff. So it sort of sat at rest for a long time. And Nate got used to the situation, the designer, and we hired a bunch of people, and they went and did sort of work on that didn't involve new UI. And so it's sort of like the problem was there, but it just didn't matter for a long time. And then all of a sudden we wanted to build channels and different collaboration features, and everyone suddenly said, like, hey, how do you guys do this? And the answer was like, we don't have a good flow. And so that was when I think, so it was sort of like multiple problems, multiple concrete instantiations of this problem. And I think, Nathan who had created this initial solution, which like solved a lot of problems, I think began to feel like, hey, everyone's asking me, how do you do this? And I haven't had a chance to solve it the way I want to yet.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. Yeah.
For what it's worth, I did not create alone the theme disaster.
No, yeah.
That was a group sin. But I was responsible for the layout system. And to be real, like I kind of cargo culted it from Flutter, who Rafe Levine gave me the idea to look at that with one of his posts many years ago. And I never really even fully had my head wrapped around the Flutter way of thinking. And it came from a very different language as well, Dart, which is dynamic, etc. I don't know. I think a lot of how Flutter worked was based on an assumption of like a quick to compile language like Dart, whereas we were much more in the scenario of kind of like the web. Anyway, sorry, I think I got off on a little bit of a tangent there. I just didn't want to claim sole responsibility for the mess that was our theme thing.
I want to ask Antonio, because Antonio was also smiling when I said, was everybody immediately in the mood to let's go, let's rewrite the whole thing?
I kind of feel like it didn't even start like as, oh, let's do a rewrite, right, Nathan? It was more just like, oh, I'm going to prototype this thing because I have this idea for how to implement it. I'm really excited about how Tailwind does UI and like, this different way of thinking about UI. So I think it started like that, right? Like, I think there was this moment where like we had these three, there was like GPUI 1, and then like there was GPUI 2. At some point there was a GPUI 3. Because like, basically, I mean, Nathan, you're probably the best to tell this story, but I think in the process of like, I think the original thought was to start more incrementally, right? And like just, leave, because like a lot of what GPUI does is not just the UI part, but like there's a lot of it involves just managing the state of the application. And so the original thought, I think, was, okay, like, let's take like a, shallower cut at this and just, attack the UI part, just like how we render stuff. But I think as like, Nathan, as you prototyped that, right, as things went along, like, again, that friction that we were talking about before of like, okay, yeah, like we just want to change the UI, but like this is all entangled with the rest of the framework. And so, yeah, I think at some point during the development of GPUI 2, yeah, like a new folder was created, GPUI 3, that like just, started over. And I don't know, like
what was created.
But yeah, I don't know. To me, like it was very like the process to the rewrite was very incremental. It was just like I don't know.
Wait, explain this, because as far as I understand it, before 3 weeks ago, right? You deleted the GPUI 2 folder and renamed it basically. So that means you had two things existing at the same time. How did you approach this? Did you build it up and flip with a feature flag, or what was the process?
Yeah, we had two build targets that were completely copies of the same thing that were like, in many cases, like there'd be a crate that was like 90% the same, but there were two versions of it, one which compiled against the first UI framework and one which compiled against the second.
And the process for it was, okay, as soon as we migrate one version to the other, so like, the project panel crate became project panel 2, then that's where we should stop writing new features on project panel. So that's like frozen, unless we need to do bug fixes, in which case we would kind of apply in both versions.
But the rationale behind this approach was that it would give us the opportunity to continue to share code. Meaning in most cases, as it turned out, it was the most expedient process to just clone the crate, let go of the old code. But if things took longer than what we'd hoped they were going to take, or for any reason at all, we sort of had these two parallel systems that could freely intermingle code. Like we could drop another third crate out of any two, for example, that shared a bunch of commonality if we needed to it just preserved a lot of optionality, I think, which taking a move this high risk, it just felt like we needed.
So what's the timeline? You started on this when? In the middle of last year, and it got merged 3 weeks ago, right?
Yeah, I mean, I also think there's a continuation of the incrementality, because I think what inspired what Antonio said, we talked about the incrementality like late in the game, but I also think there was sort of incrementality early in the game, which is worth discussing, meaning like the GPUI 2 crate for a while was, basically it took GPUI 1 and imported almost all of GPUI 1 and basically got a prototype of GPUI 2 like running on top of GPUI 1. So GPUI 1 had a certain way that, an element was defined, and we actually made a GPUI 2 element like a valid GPUI 1 element. And there were a lot of holes, but it at least allowed like Nate to start playing with the new framework and validate like that this actually was a place worth going quickly. And then at some point I faced a decision, do I keep investing in GPUI 2 and sort of papering over the, finding the seams in the old system where we can kind of insert the new behavior? But there were deeper problems. So to loop back to your question about timeline, I started experimenting. It wasn't the only thing I was working on by any means for a while. I think in August timeframe. And I think it was sort of getting into like mid-September where we'd have to go back and look at the commit logs to make sure this is all accurate. This is fuzzy memory, where I was really like hardcore cranking on this. I was working crazy hours for a little while, like just yeah, I don't know, but
I
yeah. So at
remember
some
when
point,
when
yeah,
we talked the first time we talked, you were all in Italy, right?
yeah,
And
that was like late October.
and that was when you said this is the final, like we're at the final pushes for this, right?
Like the whole team started being involved in it on that when we got together in Italy with the last week in October.
But I spent the week prior with Antonio, and I spent the week prior to that like sprinting my ass off to get things as far as I could get, so that when Antonio and I were together, and anyway, I'm not going to complain about getting woken up by our tax people, but I just did. Anyway, when Antonio and I were together and had that focused time, like I really wanted to be in a place, but I mean, I don't know. I thought the framework was close then, but it really wasn't at all. I mean, that's the negative thing about the rewrite is just like, yeah, I mean, it was a lot of risk to take on. Like it was sort of crazy. But yeah, so Antonio and I had like, we worked really long hours that week too, of just like, the goal was getting this thing ready so that the whole team can build on it.
Yeah.
As close as it can be. And, you know, we did I think we could have, you know, taken less. Like there's sort of like the view stuff was the screaming problem that just had to be solved. Like the way the element and the layout and all of that stuff worked. Then there were other problems, like the original GPUI1 was designed originally to like spit JSON at a Electron app. So because like the very original UI of Z at the very, very beginning was an Electron app that like spun up a Rust binary. We experimented with a couple different approaches. One is like just running a sub process. Then much earlier we had like literally Rust embedded as a library that we were talking to via the Node, like the V8 embedding APIs. You remember that? That was years and years ago, but like, but either way, go ahead.
When was this? This is pre-Z the company, no? Like when you
yeah, that was like X-ray era. So that was 2018, I think. Yeah, okay. 2018.
Wow. And so you said it was a lot of risk to take on, but then you said it wasn't just that it was a pain in the ass to work with the view layer. It was also that there were different assumptions, and GPA1 was built for this. And I think then you wanted to add more why it was a good idea things.
Right. So yeah, I mean, like there were a lot of assumptions that we were like spitting JSON at this Electron layer. And so the kind of the way things were designed, it was like the model layer was sort of like weirdly aware of the presentation layer. Like because of this original design constraint, it's going to be hard to get into all the reasons why, but like when you're sort of managing the state of this other process, these like pools of JSON that need to go into and out of scope, etc. Like it was designed for that and then adapted. Like, and it's just the directionality of ownership would get really weird. And so really wanting to kind of tear a sheet and say all the arrows pointing the same direction, like let's not have like model code sort of aware of view code. It wasn't quite that gross, but like that was sort of the directionality of the arrows. So that was another thing that felt really important to fix. Another thing was just like, it was the first Rust really that I really wrote, honestly. Like we did a little bit of early Rust on like the CRDT, and in that world, like, I don't know, it's just a very different problem. And it was early. And so, I don't know, I've become like obsessed with giving everything a type. But all this GPUI code we were using like U sizes all over the place when we should have had a dedicated type. We had we were using for geometry, Pathfinder's geometry types, because GPUI went through an era where we rendered all the 2D graphics with Pathfinder. And so we had all these kind of strange like vector types, and so things just weren't like the fundamental types that were being passed around everywhere. We didn't have the notion of like pixels. It was all F32s, etc. So that was like, again, we could have lived with it, but while we were doing this, I don't know. So I just kind of like, it's how you like get yourself to buying the most expensive variant of like, well, while I'm doing that, I might as well do that. And, you know, it just kind of crept up. Yeah.
And one thing that I think would be worth clarifying, I think we keep saying like, you know, it was risky, but I think it was never risky in the sense that, oh, you know, what we're doing doesn't make sense. You know, we were worried that what we're doing wouldn't make sense, or at least, I don't know, that I never felt like, oh, you know,
Same.
we can't do this. It was more just like, okay, like how more organizational, if you will, like, you know, okay, we have this other branch of the code, like how do we kind of you know, adapt it and have a whole team work on the transition. I think that's also, I think, worth talking about a little bit, I guess.
And the risk is like, how long is this going to take, and
time, right?
How many bugs like are going to go out, and I don't even know if we know the answer to that quite yet.
Okay,
but
how was the estimate? How much did you estimate? How long would this take?
The initial estimates were that we would have it done by the end of that summit. I think that was what we were hoping, which was insane, right? Like the end of the end of October. So it ended up, I guess, taking 2 more months than that initial estimate. But I think as we got closer to that estimate, I mean, that was fairly early on, we kind of retrenched and set the estimate as by the end of the year, and we did hit that estimate. So I still think all in all, like, yeah, but it was, you know, like, I knew if it went much longer than that, then we shouldn't do it. It's kind of how I felt.
But Antonio, you said it wasn't a question of can we do it, like will we make it or not. It was more about how long will it take and other factors, like
like just like you have a team of people like working on this code base, and now like everybody has to coordinate to kind of like, okay, like we need to, like we said, like clone this crate, have a version 2, like how do you like sort of orchestrate that process? And I think, I don't know, I think
how did you?
I feel like Summit was really like instrumental to that, like, and being able to, I mean, I don't know if this, I do believe that like being able to use Zed was the key, I feel like, to be really productive during that summit. Like we had like groups of like 3 or 4 people on, you know, on the same working copy, like changing and copying different files. And it was, I don't know, I think it was really good timing wise. That was a really good moment to like share context on the assumptions of this new framework, like what were the big ideas, and like just get on the same page. And yeah, like after Summit, I feel like, I don't know, I think things went pretty smoothly. They took a little longer, but
yeah, like what was cool about working on, I feel like Zed enabled like a totally different way of working. Zed plus Rust, where you could actually have 4 people in a working copy and be boiling down or, you know, burning off like, you know, hundreds or even thousands of compile errors. Like sort of the nature of the operation we were doing. It's like, okay, we all had to focus on one thing, but actually being able to be together in real time and like actually just, it was just a lot of raw work, just fixing all these errors and stuff, but it could all be done in parallel. So there was this sort of like hyper threading that was occurring as opposed to like multi-process, which is the typical.
That's funny. We did this week with Antonio. He was saying, I started at the bottom, you started at the top when we did some renaming. I was like, this is nice, you know?
Yeah, it didn't feel like that nice until the, you know, the pasta. I just kept eating pasta and
It hurt. Yeah.
yeah, pasta's really salved the pain. But yeah, it was even so. But it felt invigorating, and everybody learned about the new framework, and like, yeah, it set us up to then separate and do it independently.
So now, looking back, you would say the three of you, would you say was a success? Like we were right to do it? Like this was the correct choice?
I think so. I would say 100% yes. It was stressful. I mean, I don't know if it was a success on my health, but I mean Nathan, anybody's health. I don't know. I don't know if we should mention this, but I think I don't know. I'm happy where the code is at. Like, yeah. So I would say yes.
I'm happy where the code is at too. I think it was super. There were some super stressful moments. It was kind of like throwing a bomb into the team and the code base, and like what's cool about that is just it gave everybody a chance, this like formative experience to gel, and like they were just saying, like, have a hand in rebuilding a lot of things that we hadn't touched for a while. I think, like, obviously if you had perfect knowledge, you probably could have plotted a more efficient course to like solve the problems that we set out to solve, but like you also could have done worse in a lot of ways. You could have not done anything, and we could have still continued to like iterate along with something that was just harder than it needed to be, and we could have, like Nathan said, like inefficiently, gradually, one at a time, like one PR at a time, stepped our way here, and that would have been had challenges too. So I don't know. I don't think a success it means like this was I think it was a success. 100% is a success in that, like, the risk is now over. We're going to stabilize it. We got it working now, and we solved the problem we set out to solve, which is that the views were painful to build, and now they're not. It took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. But none of us, no one could have at the beginning said, here's a way to solve this problem without, in shorter time, and solve all the problems that we solve.
Cool. So
I think it was a success. I mean, I remember like just having kind of one-on-ones with different people on the team who were like at the beginning of the rewrite, who back when we were like, hey, building UI is a little bit hard, or we need to make some changes, and being like, well, Nathan's working on like a whole new kind of element system. At that time, that was the way I thought it was going to be. Basically, we were going to change the way elements worked in GPUI. Same.
And even that at the time, though, felt like a really big undertaking. And so in the one-on-one, people being like, so how's that going to work if we just change, the way all elements work? And being like, I've worked with Nathan and Antonio long enough and like been in different conversations where someone's like, you should, like, did you know you should be more incremental? And seen how that worked. Like, I guess, like, that's happened in the past. I remember on Atom, Nathan getting a vision to rewrite the way the text editor worked, from concept A to concept B, and like just and I would just have to say to people, which was like a kind of a hard thing to say as like a engineering manager, just like, this is like not typical the way we do things, or the way but I've seen like, I don't know, I guess I would never bet against the combination of Nathan having a creative vision for like the ideal way it should be, and then Antonio coming and just like, no matter what's broken, making it work. I would never bet against that working. So I just have to say, like, yes, this is not typical, but like, if you trust me, like I trust them, that it like that.
Thanks for vouching for us.
Work.
Very nice words, Max.
This is
recorded. Well, privately being like, are you guys sure? No, I mean, you weren't quite like that, but there was one moment where you're like, guys, this fucking sucks.
No, yeah, I mean, yeah, no.
But never
So-
really always being, I don't know, I can't thank you enough for just, I don't know, both of you, to being willing to do crazy shit. That's potentially ill-advised, because, I don't know, I've had my blunders over the years. Yeah.
So do you think, thinking in terms of optionality and, expandability and whatnot, you fix the problem of views are hard to work with, but is there other things that are now easier where you now think, oh, this will now get so much better and easier in the future?
Yeah. I mean, it's a hell of a lot easier than it would have been to blog about. That's for one thing. Which is important, I think, because this is really the foundation of the entire system. And if anybody's going to contribute to Zen, they're going to need to understand the thinking that went into the system. And what better way to understand the thinking than to present the thinking clearly in source code that we explain. And the other system was just sort of like looking at the underlying concepts through a hazy filter, or just, it's just like a lot of noise mixed up with the core ideas that were kind of in my head about how things should work. Now it's expressed clearly, not perfectly, nothing's perfect, but a lot more clearly. So that's one thing. It's going to be easier to learn, easier to teach, and I think easier to work on. We have to port it to 2 other platforms still, so I think that matters.
That's okay. So that's a good segue. That's the last bullet point I have here, which is, Nathan, you mentioned this before, that the goal was always to make Zed open source, or to make it an open source project. And you also said, I want to do this before we go open source. So was this also part of the motivation that, hey, we want to go open source, but not with this code base. We have to get the code base to this state, and then we can go open source.
Yeah, it's I think Antonio earlier mentioned, or maybe it was it was almost like dropping a bomb in the middle of the team.
Yeah.
You can drop a bomb in the middle of a small team that's all together in a room.
And you hit all of them, yeah.
Right. Oh, God. Yeah, that's a little dark. Yeah, maybe.
New metaphor.
You could give a small team in a room acid. But you can't give it to the entire code, to the entire open source community. So I think that was another thing kind of motivating it, of just there's sort of an opportunity here to get a lot of benefits and get things in order. And it's going to be really difficult to do that after open sourcing, just having lived, it just would have been too much chaos, I think, to introduce. So I'm not sure we could ever do anything quite like this again, and hopefully we'll never need to. This but we had this one opportunity to get our house in order before putting so many people on the project that it just would have been too disruptive.
Cool. Max, Antonio, do you want to add something here on the point that, I don't know, if I say it out loud, it's yes, obviously, but the idea of, I want to go open source, so I have to make the code better, seems a bit odd to me, in that I think there's a lot of open source projects that are great, fantastic open source projects that have a lot of contributors, but they themselves wouldn't say, yes, this is the best code base, for new contributors or something. How do you think, how do you value this?
I don't know. I think it's important. One thing that I think, I don't know, it was almost not just for, how can I say this? Right now, what we started doing is documenting functions in GPUI. I think, I don't know, I have a hard time imagining doing that in the old code base, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so it's it was also a tool for us, I feel to, I don't know, I feel like anybody on the team right now could look at the code in GPUI and just document it. Whereas and I think that's important for open source. So I don't know. Yeah. That's one thing. And the other thing is just for the vision that we want to achieve, as a company, I just think I don't know, we need to be a really good open source project, and we need to get all the help we can get from people, because, yeah. we're a pretty ambitious project, and I think like, I don't think we can just do it by ourselves. Like we need, everybody to participate in this effort, and so I think, I really think it's valuable.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have a point about open source code doesn't mean the code has to be perfect.
Yeah.
Nor is it perfect now.
Nor is it I would have open sourced it and stood behind it before and said, if there were weird things about it, I would have said, yeah, that's the way it is right now. I think that's fine. You don't have to have your code base in line with your imaginary ideal before you open source. But it was something we wanted to do anyway, and it sort of, I think there was an efficiency to, like, if we were going to open source soon and we were going to rewrite to solve this problem soon, to do the rewrite and then the open source, not vice versa.
And like open source takes energy and effort and engagement. But the one other thing I just want to say is like, I don't know, I'm just kind of unapologetically a perfectionist. I mean, I actually do spend time apologizing for it, but like...
you did, yeah.
I don't know. But I also it still matters to me. Like, I wouldn't say perfection matters to me. Like, I mean, I think that's a failure mode of my way of being, but beauty matters to me. Like, we've been working on this shit a really long time. I've worked way too hard to just like not care about beauty. Like, I want to just, like it. And open source, it's like we're putting the code out there. So now part of what I'm expressing in the world, like if I were in it for the money, I would have started a crypto coin in like 2014 or whatever. Like the whole reason for doing this is it's really about, more than anything, self-expression. And the code is a part of that expression. Now I think there's again a failure mode of that where people become obsessed with the code for its own sake and all they do is like admire how many monads they have or whatever. But like for the code to be beautiful and crafted, I don't know, I think it's a valid thing. As long as it doesn't become a petty god.
Torsten, I think you joining, I had in my mind Torsten joins January 15, and then meanwhile this rewrite is going on. And, like, I think, and, a couple of weeks ago, things were in a little bit more chaotic of a state, where it was sort of like the last 20% / last 90% of the rewrite. So I had a little, like, I knew, okay, this person who is joining, who is kind of so experienced in like engineering leadership and stuff that he probably has a personality and an opinion and stuff about that. Like, I'm just curious how it landed with you to come in day one, the rewrite's going on. We're fixing problems that I assume you're kind of fixing problems that had like come up in the course of fixing other problems with the rewrite. It was sort of like the that's like where we're at right now is my perception. So how did it feel to you?
I should take notes, but I got couple thoughts. First thought was, first time I talked to Nathan, he told me we're in the middle of this big rewrite, and I was like, ooh, let's see. And then we talked 4 or 6 weeks later, and you said, well, we're nearly done. Like, we're on the final stretches of this. And that I found already impressive, because it's not easy, to pull this off and then 6 weeks later go, well, actually, it takes 6 more months or something. So then this week I joined, and my impressions are, I see Antonio navigating through this up and down the stack with ease and being able to say, oh, this is how the layout works. This is how we can do this view. This is how the renderer works. And I think there's a lot of power in having such control and knowledge over your entire stack and knowing exactly how all of this works. So that's one impression. The other is that I'm impressed by how, the designers, everybody, how they make changes and how easily, you can change, the background color of this, and then you have like your Flexbox style layouting stuff in your native GPU powered app, which was impressive to me. The other thing that I noticed, I actually wanted to tweet out some screenshots today. I don't know if you've all did this, but if you look at the changelogs of the said preview builds that went out, it's a lot of bug fixes. It's a lot of bullet points checked off. And if you take this and you multiply it with the number of people on the team, that tells me that all of the bugs are pretty easy to fix. Like they don't take, oh, here we discovered a thing that takes 4 weeks. It was all Antonio spends, I don't know, at most like 2 hours on one bug or something. So that also tells me seems successful, seems like there's no traps and there's no, face palms where you realize, oh, we took the wrong turn here. So I don't know. My impressions are overall super positive. I see the team just, polishing basically, like getting rid of the last rough edges and shipping stuff, but it's high cadence, like lots of PRs merge every day.
So you're going to stay?
Yeah, there were some earlier on. I mean, I think we discovered a lot of them in Italy, some early decisions that were a bridge too far. Like there's one point where we wanted all of the models and views to be like multi-thread friendly, and there was one thing that allowed, which was like not having to care whether you were on the main thread or a background thread, and seemed like a cool idea, but it wasn't. So we had to kind of backpedal on that and rip out a fair amount of, we spilled some blood trying to take that hill before retreating.
Yeah.
But as long as you let go of bad ideas, I don't know, then my sense is as long as you could discover, okay, this is not a good idea and back out and make that decision quickly, then there's a little bit of budget to explore things.
Yeah.
The
other cool thing, this was yesterday, Nathan, you wrote this blog post on, how it works basically, GPUI, or how you use app and app context and whatnot. And I don't think it's that long, like 5 pages or something, but I read through it and I was like, yeah, okay, I see. I think I get it now. I think I get how the models work in the app context and whatnot. And then you start to think, that's good that you can read 5 pages and they start with 5 lines and then you build up to a max of 15 lines and I understand all of the concepts. So it seems like this is, a good, easy to understand framework or API. And while reading it, I also thought back to all of the code I've seen, the update calls and context notify and whatnot. And I realized, I think Nathan explained in his blog post maybe 80% of the code I've seen, which is really good. It's not, he only described the main function and the dragons are all on the other side here that are, it's, I don't know, the impressions are positive on my side.
Really happy to hear that.
Me too.
Yeah. So I am impressed by, this is off the right, whatever. It's just, I've thought about, I don't know, maybe same for you, but designers and engineers, how do they interact? How should designers write code? Should engineers copy Figma files and CSS and whatnot? And I've thought so long about this for so many years, and I've seen so many different approaches. But then I come here, and I'm just impressed by how Nate changes code and then how Marshall takes suggestions by Nate and turns it into code real quickly. And then you can read through this and see this HTML kind of thing in Rust with, I don't know, it seems like this is a really good mode of working on UI applications if you have the people who can do it.
Yeah, and the cool thing is when Nate joined us, he wasn't as good of a programmer as he is now, but through just working with us and just having having to deal with stuff.
Yeah,
And then the introduction of ChatGPT, where he now has something that can like he can engage with. So I just think like coding is more accessible to everyone than it's ever been.
yeah.
So it's just a more viable way of working now as well. And we can't discount Nate's tenacity in walking that path, but like it's doable. Yeah.
I on my second day I sent a text message to a friend while on a call or in a channel with Nate, and I sent my friend, dude, the designers here write Rust code. You know, it's just because he did like effortlessly. Like I was debugging, I don't know what it was. I was failing to fix a bug with like layout stuff, and then he came in and he's like, "Oh no, actually this is not this. Let's do this. Oh, we can do this. Let's move this down here." And then he opened Figma and he's like, "This is what it should be." And then he went back and wrote Rust code. So I was impressed.
And like I just think I don't know, we have sort of this we lean really heavily on just working together and working on the code.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of process here other than that. We'll see how long that can last, but like so far it does. But I think one of the consequences of that is like we're not really set up for this other way of working as well, where like I'm going to build this Figma and like I don't think Nate he doesn't love doing that of like spoon feeding the design to an engineer, and I don't think our engineers love consuming that. It's just like not the vibe. So just being able to get in there and do it, whoever you are, and pull someone in if you need help. Like that's another big piece of it. Just works better for our style.
That was my, I don't know, if I had to, one bullet point for my first week, it would be how much it changes things to develop Z in Z. It's just, it just reminds me so much of sitting next to somebody in an office while even though I'm remote. And it's really different from the last 5 years of me being fully remote. But it's just, Antonio and I don't know how many hours we spend in calls this week. I don't know, 3 to 5 every day this whole week or something. And then the other 3 or 4 I spent with other people in calls. And it's just this, you run the stuff together, you look at the code together, you see, can we tweak this? Should we do this? And you throw it away. And it's, you get rid of all of this. Oh, I send a PR. Antonio will review it, this evening. And then next morning I wake up and he will say, maybe we shouldn't do it. And then I reply, really, why? And then he says, well, I don't think it actually does something. But we were in the code together. We talked about the trade-offs and then we just said, close that branch or merge it or whatever. It's nice.
Super happy. Yeah. I don't know. It's like, it's just interesting and feels good to hear your perspective coming into it, I guess, because I've just been in it for a while, or it's kind of crept up on me,
Yeah.
Same. I've been taking that for granted for the past 3 years, and so I think, sometimes you get so focused on the problems that you're trying to solve with the system that it's like, it's nice to be reminded of, that it's there's, we're building something that is
that actually works and changes stuff. Yeah. I actually sent a screenshot of the new Z to a bunch of friends today. It's just like, this looks so good, man. Like it looks nice. It looks really cool. I said this twice yesterday on different calls. It's cool.
Awesome.
Well, I think we're at an hour, and maybe in the interest of how much we have to do, we actually should keep a tight time. I almost think we should just put the whole conversation out. Maybe you can cut out the parts where I talk shit or swear.